All right, guys, so we are still moving through Exodus, the second book of the Bible. We are at chapter 11. I am going to cover all 10 verses of chapter 11 and then the first 20 verses of chapter 12, just so that we can kind of get a complete picture, and then we'll finish off chapter 12 in a separate video. So we left off before where Moses and Pharaoh are having this kind of conversation. They are at their wits' end with each other, and Pharaoh has said, "I don't want to see your face no more." Up to this point, there have been 9 plagues. The first plague is all the water in the Nile was turned into blood. So that was the water in the Nile and everything that comes out of the Nile. So all the rivers and streams and everything else were affected. Then there were frogs that covered the land. Then there were lice that covered the land. Then flies covered the land. And then all the cattle is affected. And so all the cattle die off. They're struck with this sickness and they die off. This is around the point where the cattle of the Israelites are safe, but the cattle for the Egyptians are affected. And then from this point forward, everything affects just the Egyptians. The Israelites are safe from the remaining plagues. Then there are boils, or these like big open sores that cover the bodies of all the Egyptians that are affected by this. And this point is where the magicians are no longer able to duplicate or provide any response to what's happening, because they themselves are affected by this. And then they have hail, and this hail comes, it's very big rocks of ice that fall from the sky, but it is also paired with thunder and fire, and this fire burns up all the vegetation on the ground, and this hail is beating down or breaking all the sticks and stalks of the plants and crops that are currently up. After the hail, there comes a plague of locusts that eats anything that is remaining green. The remainder of the crops, everything else is eaten at that point. And then there are 3 days of darkness. And I point out these 3 days of darkness, no one leaves their home, no one moves. There is only darkness in Egypt, in the land next to it, Goshen, where the Israelites live. In the space right next door, there's light. Nothing is affected in that way. And I believe that this darkness is not just a can't see darkness, because I do believe it was dark. There was no light, but this darkness was also a mental darkness. There is it feels very dark. These people are they're like captive in their homes. They don't leave their beds. This feels like an emotional darkness or a mental darkness, like a depression. And I mean, I could imagine 3 days of sitting in the dark with no light. That's a long time to not be able to see your hand in front of your face. And that's how dark it was. So that might cause some depression, even if it wasn't, the full meaning of that darkness, it would cause it. So we are going to jump into chapter 11. Again, there are 10 verses in chapter 11, and we are going to read through chapter 12 and stop at verse 20. So it starts off with God telling Moses that he is going to send one final plague. And when this plague hits Egypt, you guys are going to be set free. Pharaoh I don't care nothing about his heart being hard, none of that stuff. He's going to throw you out of his land. He's going to be so hurt, so upset, so over it at this point that he's going to push you out of his land. And so he tells him to go tell the people to borrow all the silver, all the gold, and jewels. Give me all your gold, all your silver, all your precious metals, stones, all those things. Go borrow those things from your neighbors. And by neighbors, they mean the Egyptians. In here, they are not borrowing from other Israelites. They are borrowing these gold and silver jewels from the Egyptians. And this is how the remaining wealth leaves the land. So, God gave the people favor so that they would say yes. Because if you're in the middle of all these plagues, everything's going wrong, the economic future of your country is at stake, and someone says, hey, can I borrow some of your gold jewelry? And you're like, I might need this to, buy some food later. In this situation, they say yes. God gives them favor. So they're like, you know what? You've always been good to me. If you're asking for it, clearly you have a reason for it. No big deal. Besides, you guys are slaves. Y'all live here. Where y'all going? So they lend off all this silver, gold, and these precious stones, precious metals, all of this jewelry. And so Moses says that at midnight, he didn't say in 2 weeks, he said at midnight, it's getting ready to happen. All the firstborn in the land of Egypt will die. He said all of them. It's going to affect Pharaoh himself and his family, all the way down to the lowest servant that is living outside in a barn or a stable, not even her own house. It's going to hit everybody and every animal. Absolutely everybody's going to be impacted by this. The firstborn of everything is going to be affected. And it says that there's going to be a great cry that comes throughout Egypt. And it's going to be like no other. This great mourning, this cry out, this heartbreak is going to be the thing that makes them say, enough. Enough, get out. Go do what you got to do, get out. I'm not dealing with this anymore. I don't want no more. You and your God can have it. I'm out. I'm done. I'm over it. Get out. And so Moses tells Pharaoh and get on up out of there. Because remember, they don't like each other at this point. At this point, Pharaoh say, I don't want to see your face no more. And so Moses like, you ain't going to see me. Don't even worry about it. I ain't coming. And so he goes with this final message and delivers it to the servants and to the people and gives them their instructions. And so in verse 9, God tells Moses that Pharaoh is not going to listen. This warning is going to mean nothing to him, but I need you to give him the warning. I want him to know what's coming, so that when it does happen, it's not a fluke, it's not by chance, it's not any of those things. It is 100% me. He knows it, you know it, we all know it. And so that's what happened. God tells Pharaoh that the firstborn among everyone and all the animals are going to die. And when this happens, you're going to let my people go. You're going to let them go. The children of Israel are going to be free after this. Okay, so I'm going to jump into chapter 12. And so it starts off with God telling Moses and Aaron, that this is the first month. This is the beginning. This is the mark. I want you to mark the day that we're doing this as the start of your year. This is the first month and the first day of the year. And what I want you to do is to start this celebration of the Passover. And so he says in the 10th day of the month, I want every one of them to get a lamb. Every family should get a lamb and they'll take it into their house. They're to come together as a family to eat this lamb. If your household is small, say it's just, you're an only child and, your parents may have been only children. So as you go to get together, there's not a lot of people and you're not going to eat a whole lamb by yourselves in one night. God says, I want you to get with your neighbor. I don't want you to make food that's going to be left over. I don't want you to cook, in excess. I want you to do it the way I'm telling you to do it. There's a reason for your obedience in this moment. And so he says, tell everybody to come together so that there's no leftover food. There should be enough. I want you to only kill what is necessary to cover or to feed your family or the grouping of families that come together so that there's no food wasted. And so you're supposed to take a lamb in its first year without blemish. And that's verse 5. And you're going to take it out. You're going to separate it. And when you separate it on the 10th day, I want you to bring it out from among this group. And on the 14th day, you're going to take this animal and you're going to kill it. So at this point, you're going to kill the animal so that you can prepare it for food. Not we just out here killing the animals and sacrificing stuff. That's not what we're doing right here. This is a sacrifice, but it's not that type of thing. And so they're going to kill it. They're going to take the blood of this animal and they're going to put it on the doorpost. And we have heard about the blood on the doorpost is what saves him. And so this is obedience. This is a request for obedience, because anything outside of this, saying, okay, well, instead of putting it on my doorpost, I'm going to put it across the whole front of my house. Instead of putting it on my doorpost, I'm going to put it on the windows. Instead of putting it on the doorpost, I'm just going to put it on the ground on the my little a little entryway. I'm gonna put it right there. You don't get to decide how to obey God when God tells you to do something. You got to do it the way He says it. And so the blood was supposed to go on both sides of the door and across the top. And it would be that you or in shape. I guess it's gonna be an in because it's this way, but it's you put it on both sides of the door and across the top. And then when you come in, you're gonna take this lamb, you're gonna cook it, and you're gonna eat it. And you're gonna eat it that night. You're gonna roast it with fire. You'll have it with unleavened bread and eat it with bitter herbs. Bitter herbs are like endive and arugula and like these I can't think of what word I'm thinking about now, like thyme and rosemary. They're like sweet and flavorful, but like these other herbs are designed to bring to your remembrance. It's the reason why they tangy. It's supposed to be part of the symbolism of this Passover that's happening for the first time here, and they're being taught how to do it, and then moving forward they'll be taught why they do it. And so they're going to take this food, they're going to eat it in the way they're supposed to. There's no leftovers. Don't pack nothing up to take with you tomorrow. Don't plan for any of these other things. I'm telling you, your deliverance is coming tonight. And so don't eat it raw, don't boil it, but roast it with fire so that it is cooked thoroughly in the way that I'm telling you to cook it. Don't be out here trying to simmer this all night long so it's tender. Don't try and, cook it the way you like it, slow roasted or something like that. Put it a little rare on it. No, roast it with fire, cook it thoroughly, do it the way that I'm telling you to do it so that it is prepared in time for this meal to happen and is prepared in the way that I want it. And so in verse 10 it says, let nothing remain of it until morning. That which remains you should burn with fire. No leftovers. Eat until you are full. And if there is anything left, and the parts that you're not going to eat, things like that, burn it with fire. Burn it. It needs to be burned. Do not leave anything behind. This is a meal that you're going to consume this one time. This is not a meal that you're going to have forever. This is kind of almost a foreshadowing to Christ's sacrifice and the fact that it only needs to be done once. It's not something that needs to happen every year, every 6 months, in the way that sacrifices up to this point have happened, and sacrifices throughout the Bible and throughout the Old Testament have happened pretty regularly scheduled, but it was something that only needs to be done because it was done in the way that God could do it. And it kind of foreshadows to the fact that we're getting ready to get out of here. Like, you don't have time to pack stuff up. You don't have a whole bunch of time to carry things. I need to pop this in the freezer so it'll stay in the cooler. There's no time for that. So, and so in verse 11, it says, you shall eat it with your loins girded and your shoes on your feet and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. This is not a leisurely meal with your neighbors and friends. Keep your shoes on, which is something that most people don't do. You don't typically bring your outside shoes and leave them on your feet while you're having dinner. In most cultures, in most places, you leave your shoes at the door, especially in this time where we walking on dirt and in sandals. Like, you would typically clean yourself up for dinner. And he's saying, no, this time I want you to leave your clothes on, your shoes on, and you should have they're eating in their outside clothes. This is not, I came in through a little, a pair of shorts and a t-shirt on. Nope, I want you in the jeans and the button down. Like, I want you dressed for outside. I want you dressed to leave the house and be ready with your staff in hand. I don't want you to have to go, let me go get my keys out of my car. Keys out of my room. Let me get my wallet from on top of the TV. No, everything should be together with you, because there's going to be a moment where it's going to come quick and you got to be able to move. And so he says in verse 12, I will pass through the land of Egypt and I will smite the firstborn, both man and beast, against all the gods of Egypt. Everything that Egypt worshipped, everything that Egypt believed to be true. He said, I'm absolutely going to do away with that. Don't even worry about it. There's not going to be anything that stands against me. No belief is going to be able to stand, because they're going to know that I did what I said, and that their prayers to these unreal gods, to these idols they've created, are not going to stand. And so, um, in verse 13, it says, "And the blood shall be to you a token upon the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I will pass over." See that? See what God did right there? Pass over you, and the plague will not be upon you and destroy you. Only Egypt. So obedience protects. Stop doing things your way. Stop thinking you got time to be obedient on Thursday when God told you to move on Monday. Stop thinking that there's going to be a later, or you can do it a little bit, or do it the way you want it. Obedience is what protects you. Being aligned with God's will, being aligned with God's plan, doing things the way He said. If God said, when the light turns green across the street and you turn on the red, the cars are coming. You have stepped outside of His protection. And the protection is what saves you. God is, it says 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways in the Bible, how God protects us. But He protects us through our obedience. It requires us to come to Him. It requires us to seek refuge in Him. It requires us to know who He is. We got to be believers in order to get the benefits of belief. We have to be believers to get the benefits. And this is one of the benefits. Our obedience to God shows that we believe. It shows that we trust Him. And so be careful about your obedience. Make sure you are listening and following the instructions God gave you. And if you are uncertain about the instructions that God gave you, start with salvation, reading your Bible, and praying. If you're doing those basic things, if you're getting that, and then as you're reading and studying and learning more about His word, as you're reading it and studying it, start to do the things. Start to pick up the characteristics of the people that God called righteous. Start to pick up those beliefs and patterns and attitudes and the way that they dealt with things. Start doing that, and it'll start to work out the things that God doesn't like in your life. And He'll continue to work with you, and you'll be more and more clear. So again, we're going to start with salvation. Let's understand who God is, and that we believe who He is, the sacrifice He made, and that it was for us, and that we believe this is true. Then we're going to work on praying and reading and really studying and trying to apply God's word. Okay? So jumping back into verse 14. It says, "This is going to be a memorial. You're going to keep a feast like this unto the Lord throughout your generations." That means forever. That doesn't mean there's going to be a time that it stops. Not 3 generations and then y'all, we good, we even, we don't have to worry about it no more. Throughout your generations. This is something that God has said. This Passover, this remembrance of this salvation that He provided His people and freeing them from the death that was coming, is something that needs to be observed forever. And it says the way they're going to observe it in verses 15 through 20. You're going to eat the unleavened bread. Unleavened bread is just bread that doesn't have leavening, so it doesn't rise. Those are very flat crackers, like saltines are a type of unleavened bread. They don't have the big fluffy rise like your biscuit, like a biscuit would. It doesn't have that fluffiness that you would get in like a loaf of regular white or wheat bread. So that leavening isn't there, so it doesn't rise and get all soft and tender and delicious. And on the inside, it's a harder, flakier, flat bread. And it says, so 7 days you'll eat unleavened bread. This is how they're going to celebrate this going forward as a reminder of what's getting ready to happen. He's giving them instructions on how to do this in advance of the anniversary celebration that's coming. And then it says verse 15. I'm back. You're going to get the leaven out of your house. Like, not that you're not just going to cook with it, but it shouldn't be in there. Remove any leavening agents that you have from your house, from your kitchen. Pull it out. And then we're going to have a holy convocation. That means we're going to have a great big service. We're going to have a celebration. It's going to be a worship service. And then on the 7th day, so there's one on the first day, and then there's one on the 7th day. And then there won't be any work done during that time. It's a holiday, y'all. We're gonna praise God and celebrate for everything that He's done for us. This is a praise and worship celebration. This is a point of praise and worship where you should have unlimited time to worship. And then you're going to observe this feast, and it's a reminder of the day that God brought you out of Egypt and away from the south, brought you away from your enemies. So there is no time. That's how quickly God delivered you, that there wasn't enough time to wait for your bread to rise. That's why it was going to be unleavened bread. We're going to have to just cook the bread the way it is. We don't have time to let it rest and rise in the way that dough does. And so, in the first day on the 14th month, when this anniversary comes around of this meal that you're having now, I want you to eat it the same way as a reminder of how fast it happened and what happened. And make sure during this time, this feast of unleavened bread, this Passover time, that there are no leavening agents in the house. Not in your food, not in your kitchen, not in your house. Clean it up. Get it out of there so that you are observing this and giving honor to God for what he's done. So, quick recap. God told Moses and Aaron that he was going to send the final plague, and the plague was going to come so hard that this was going to be the thing that would make Pharaoh let the people leave. And in advance of that, he said to tell the Israelites to go to their neighbors, the Egyptians, and borrow all the wealth. Borrow their silver and gold jewelry. Borrow all of these things. And then they were instructed to come home. They were instructed to get together in groups as your whole family would come together. They were to take a lamb. They would set it aside on the 10th day of the month, and on the 14th day of the month, they were going to kill this lamb. And when the lamb died, they would take the blood and they would put the blood on both sides of their doorpost and across the top. And then they would take that lamb and they would eat it. And you're supposed to cook it specifically and eat it all in that same day. Anything that's left at the end of the meal, any bite that's not taken, needs to be burned. There's no food. There's no time for food. There's no none of that stuff. There's no time for leftovers, packing, storing, none of that. And when they eat, they're supposed to eat fully dressed, ready to walk out the door, because God is telling them in advance, I'm about to get you out of here real quick. So be ready to go. When I say it's time to go, let's go. And then they are instructed to make sure that there is no leavening. They can have unleavened bread, meaning don't let your bread rise. This is again foreshadowing to how quickly they're going to move. There's not enough time for your bread to rise. And then God points out, after this happens, I'm marking these days and times. I'm putting this on the calendar so that you know when it's time in the future. When the anniversary of this date comes around, I want you to celebrate by doing the same things. I want you to make sure there is 7 days of no leavening. I want you to make sure that there is a holy convocation on the start of the week, and then at the end of the week, so that there is a very, very clear point of gratitude and reminder of where I brought you from and how I brought you out and how quickly it happened. Okay, so I have gone through all of chapter 11, that's just 10 verses, and then the first part of chapter 12, which is the first 20 verses. Okay, so I want you to remember obedience, 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 obedience. Listen to God and do what he tells you to do. Do not make changes. Do not decide you're going to do it your way. If God said put on a blue shirt, don't put on a red shirt and be like, well, at least I got on a shirt. That's not being obedient. You might miss your blessing because the person with $1 million is looking for somebody in a blue shirt and your shirt is red. You need to make sure you are obeying God. Sometimes obedience is hard. Sometimes obedience requires you to do some things that you really don't want to do. Give up some friendships, give up some habits, give up some things that you may actually enjoy, but trust and believe that your obedience is protecting you and maybe saving your life. Y'all be blessed.